So the other day I was taking apart my microwave trying to figure out how to turn it into a particle accelerator because I have dolphin ghosts in my walls, and I began to think about how Emperor Palpatine's face looks like it was run through a microwave for too long, which at that point made me think about the dark side of the Force, something I rarely ever really talk about on this channel. I spend most of my time criticizing the Jedi, you know, the baby snatchers that they are. And that's because the Sith have always been too easy of a target to go after. They're just so obviously evil. Some have horns on their heads or disfigurements from using the dark side. At a minimum, they have yellow eyes, right? Aside from Dooku and a few others, you can basically judge a Sith or a dark side Force user by the cover of their book. And that's what makes them kind of boring to me. I mean, these are power-hungry individuals who lack impulse control. They are clearly a cautionary tale, one I hope we all had learned before we gotten into the Star Wars franchise. But I guess some people missed that lesson or they just don't care, which is fine. But you know, you take a closer look at the Sith, they really never end up happy. Not that happiness is everything. But it's like even after these dark side Force users grab up all of the power and fully embrace the dark side, it's still not enough for them. They're always after one thing, something that kind of runs counter to the Sith ideology in my point of view.
You must join me, Obi-Wan.
Become my apprentice.
Join my family. Join me.
I want you to come and work for me at Mondo Burger.
Take your father's place at my side.
Guys, if the dark side actually has all the snacks, why are they saying shit like this? Are the snacks fake? I mean, I thought all we needed was the snacks of the dark side and then everything would be okay. So why are they still asking for help? Well, some of you might say, Alan, I mean, these dark side Force users, they clearly are just taking people who are weaker than them and using them as servants for protection or to help them with their own goals. The snacks are a lure, they're a lie. Like most processed foods in America. I mean, take a look at Palpatine and his Inquisitors. I'm sure he doesn't really care if one or all of them gets killed. They're just an afterthought. Or even Anakin. I mean, Palpatine did save him from getting cooked alive on the banks of a lava river on Mustafar. Quick word from today's sponsor, Ownersaber.com. They are the premier lightsaber manufacturer for people looking for unique or replica lightsabers, like this Lego saber called the Last Brick, which is both fun and immediately recognizable. Or perhaps something a bit more familiar, but also different at the same time, like this. It's called the Black Moon Saber, and it is a replica of the Darksaber. And it features that very distinct looking hilt and edged blade, which reminds us of its Mandalorian creator. Most of the blades from Ownersaber.com comes with either a simple RGB blade, which is good for sparring and smacking around. Then you have these pixel blades, which have a LED strip running alongside the entire length of the blade, which gives you all sorts of really cool looking effects, like this. Ownersaber.com also has a new lightsaber belt clip bundle with the Eclipse lightsaber. It's a clean and minimalistic way to wear a lightsaber, just like a Jedi. Right now, all blades from Ownersaber.com are 30% off plus free shipping. We'll link them down in the comment section below. Also, you guys can use our promo code that's EWOK, all caps, for an additional $15 off. Thank you for your patience. On to the rest of the video. But Palpatine really wanted Anakin as an enforcer, a fearsome symbol of the Empire's overwhelming power and might. He used the Death Star before there was a Death Star, which is probably why Darth Vader really didn't like the Death Star.
Don't be too proud of this technological terror you've constructed. The ability to destroy a planet is insignificant next to the power of the Force.
But Palpatine is a specific type of Sith Lord who has limited emotions or feelings, except for the more primal rage and fear that even the most simple animals can feel. He has no conscience either. He's a complete psychopath. He manipulates people, creates relationships that seem real on the surface but are shallow and fake. This is not just a Force ideology, it is a mental disorder or health issue. And I'm not saying this so that we feel bad for Palpatine in any way. We just need to simply recognize that this is why he is the way he is. And so when he gets an apprentice, it's solely because he wants to use them as a tool. In this way, he perfectly embraces what it means to be a Sith. It's the perfect institution and system for people like him. The first line of the Sith code is, "Peace is a lie, there is only passion." The central tenet basically states that there should be no cooperation between dark side Force users, and that dark side Force users should embrace their emotions, their jealousy, their insecurities, and use it to power their hate. But the problem is most Sith are not psychopaths or sociopaths. They're not Palpatine. Or at least they didn't become like Palpatine until the dark side energy rewired and decayed their brain and destroyed the last bits of decency, empathy, and love they still had inside of them. Anakin became a Sith because of love. After losing his mom to the Tuskens, he would do everything in his power to protect his wife, Padme.
He could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
He could actually save people from death.
He sought the power of the Sith to save those he loved and not for power itself. And one could say that Dooku approached the dark side in a similar way. He was disillusioned by the hypocrisy of the Jedi and was desperate to bring stability to the galaxy. He also wanted the strength of the dark side to help them. They both came into the Sith dark side infrastructure with good intentions, but unless you're someone like Darth Sidious, who's a complete psychopath, the dark side will not nourish you. It'll just leave you feeling disappointed. In fact, in many ways, the dark side will amplify everything that was terrible in your life. It will amplify all of your mistakes and make them 10 times worse. And that's because individuals like Anakin and Dooku do not fit the dark side mentality 100%. They only adopted psychopathic traits to survive and seek power, but it's not really truly what they are. And most people would be uncomfortable with these kind of traits. You know, the Jedi are always talking about how it's important to get a Force user when they are a newborn so that they can program them into a Jedi mindset. Older individuals like Anakin were seen as tainted because they already had lives, families, a worldview that might run counter to the Jedi programming. Well, the same thing happened to the Sith all the time as well. I'm not just talking about Vader saving Luke and finding his humanity. I'm talking about that constant remorse Vader had when he joined the dark side, and even as he was serving as an enforcer to Emperor Palpatine, he was always a conflicted individual, and I'm sure Dooku had very similar thoughts. Like most Jedi turned Sith, Anakin was lured in by a lie. He would never end up saving his wife, she would die. He would also sever ties with the organization that he called home for most of his life. He would sever his relationship with his mentor and friend Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was very much like a father figure to him. This was completely self-destructive because, you know, for those of you who know Anakin Skywalker, the one thing he's always wanted in his life was to not be alone, to have family, to have loved ones. And by following Emperor Palpatine's way, the Sith way, he basically orchestrated his own downfall. And he didn't just lose Padme, he lost everything. Anakin would spend years isolated in his armor. He spoke to no one, had no close friends or acquaintances. The few moments of solitude he did have were in the confines of a Bacta tank or inside of his meditation chamber, where he spent a lot of time looking at the past, trying to destroy his former self, which only made his hatred and pain even worse, until that hatred became the very oxygen that would fuel his life. And so when Palpatine tells people to join him, he is being manipulative. But when Dooku asks Obi-Wan Kenobi to join him, when Anakin asks Ahsoka or Luke to join him, it's for a different reason. The more obvious purpose being that Dooku and Anakin wanted help to take out Darth Sidious, as was Sith tradition. But the second part is I truly feel like Dooku and Anakin, at least in some parts, were lonely. They wanted companions, they wanted peers, they wanted individuals who they saw as kind of nearly equal to them when it came to the Force. I mean, Dooku went from being a part of the Jedi Order to also being very isolated. Sure, he would become the leader of the Separatist Alliance, but he was mostly surrounded by droids and the Separatist High Council, individuals he had no real connection with. Dooku has killed plenty of Jedi without any remorse, but when he runs into Obi-Wan Kenobi, he treats him differently, and that's because Obi-Wan was the apprentice of his own apprentice, Qui-Gon Jinn. And although Dooku was a cold and sometimes unforgiving master, he truly respected and loved Qui-Gon Jinn.
I used to bring Qui-Gon here as a boy. I was fascinated with this tree, having been born here on Coruscant, a planet of steel and stone. He knew nothing like it.
And so in many ways, Qui-Gon Jinn's death was really the turning point for Dooku. It was the last straw for him. And like Anakin, when Dooku fell, no matter how hard he tried, he still couldn't get rid of his old self, especially at his age. He was like, what, 60, 70, 80? Which is why Dooku doesn't just immediately kill Obi-Wan Kenobi here. The reality is, for most people, the dark side is not the right path. At first, people might feel the rush of power and strength and be swayed by it, but in the long term, well,
The dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural.
yeah, that's really the key. The dark side is very unnatural. As unnatural as the Jedi's rejection of love.
You can't accept love?
These are both very extreme organizations that only really fit people with extreme personality traits. And the Sith, well, you know, Anakin knew about their biggest weakness.
The Sith rely on their passion for their strength. They think inwards, only about themselves.
The Sith are commonly narcissists on top of everything else. They have an inflated sense of self, and the power they wield allows them to depend less and less on others for help and assistance. And so they begin to believe that they are all powerful and unstoppable, and isolation usually follows after that. But this mentality by its very nature underscores just how unnatural the Sith ideology is when compared to human culture and behavior. We are all social beings. We don't just need other people to defeat space wizards or protect us from enemies. Most of us need meaningful social interactions to live a good and healthy life. It doesn't matter if we're extroverts or introverts. Studies have shown that being socially connected with others is hugely beneficial, not only to one's mental health, but also to their physical well-being. And from a philosophical point, seeking out others, having discussions, having a sounding board to reflect your own ideas off of is really good for developing a better understanding of yourself in the wider world. Just like in governance, having checks and balances from an interpersonal relationship standpoint makes a person stronger and helps sharpen their cognitive skills. Now, because humans are intelligent, because of our very social nature, we have to seek out others to have conversations with. And so what happens when we become isolated like these Sith Lords? Well, we become depressed like Darth Vader. Our judgment becomes skewed like Count Dooku. We become paranoid and deluded like Emperor Palpatine. Even Palpatine the psychopath, who does not really seek or need relationships, or at least meaningful relationships with others, does need to have social interactions with other people. I mean, he was a far more effective leader and politician when he had to meet with the Jedi and various senators and political interest lobbies within the Republic. Having daily meetings, talking to the media, and enduring crowds made Palpatine a more cunning and pragmatic individual. But after Palpatine turned the Republic into the Empire, he more or less became a hermit. He was rarely seen in public, and although he still cared about governing the Empire, in the latter days of the Galactic Civil War, he had become obsessed with all sorts of nonsense like Sith artifacts and the unknown region. His social isolation also led him to completely misjudging the threat the rebellion and New Republic posed to his rule, which led to him trusting foolish individuals like Tarkin instead of Thrawn. Palpatine's paranoia and mistrust led him to extremely punitive measures which would be used against the insurgency. That actually made his enemy's cause stronger. Palpatine wasn't lonely like Anakin was, but he definitely wanted to surround himself with competent individuals who can carry out tasks he needed them for. This is really the problem with the Sith. It is an extreme way of looking at the world, an extreme way of living life, and ultimately the end goal of the Sith ideology is to rise to the very top of the pyramid, which of course is not a great place to be. Now, those individuals who worship and pursue power don't really understand the consequences of taking on that much responsibility. This is an important lesson for all you youngins out there just starting life. It's good to have aspirations, to be motivated for greatness. But at any extreme, even the extreme pursuit of one's life goals can become pretty toxic. One cannot ignore other things like maintaining good relationships with family and friends, or taking care of your physical and mental health. In the States, our culture, our capitalism, is what makes us one of the most powerful nations in the world, a place where everyone wants to come to. I mean, just look at the immigration numbers. But that same culture of success at any cost is extremely toxic and leads to broken and terrible lives and a much less happier nation. I mean, how many of you guys have seen those cringy Sigma male meme posts with like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho? So many people empathize with Patrick Bateman because he acknowledges that the world is screwed up and that one has to be cutthroat. But these audiences also forget that Patrick Bateman worked in finance in the 90s, a cocaine-laced nightmare of greed, selfishness, and basically all the worst aspects of our system rolled into one profession. It's because of people like Bateman that we would eventually have the dot-com bubble burst and the subprime mortgage crisis, which turned into the Great Recession. And that was a scheme that would make Palpatine proud. Now, people who see Bateman as an admirable figure miss this point. All that luxury status, the wealth, the shredded body he has is meaningless. He's not winning. He's not doing these things for himself. He's just doing these things to survive. He's not really getting one over anyone else. There's no such thing as a Sigma male. If anything, Patrick Bateman is a loser, or worse than that, he's not living a life. He's dead inside and out, and I thought that was obvious if you've seen the movie, but I guess a lot of people have only seen these clips on Instagram. But what is interesting is all those things that attract young audiences to Patrick Bateman, well, they're the same things the Sith and dark side Force users use to attract people to their ideology. And the Sith path can only really lead to death and destruction. I mean, take a look at, I wouldn't say decent, but some of the more pragmatic Sith Lords in Sith history, like Darth Bane and Darth Plagueis. They both tried to fundamentally change the Sith system because they realized it was toxic and idiotic in nature. Bane realized this constant struggle between Sith Lords was destroying the Sith. There was just simply no middle ground. He also realized the system wasn't a meritocracy where the strongest Sith rose to the top, and that's because there were no rules, and a bunch of weaker Sith Lords could easily team up and take out someone as powerful as Bane. Bane believed that the rule of two Sith Lords at a time, one apprentice and one master, could mitigate some of those problems. And for a while, it surprisingly worked, which shows us that, the Sith were not one-dimensional. There were actually individuals willing to cooperate to a certain extent. But eventually the rule of two would collapse under the sheer weight of the natural order of things. Darth Plagueis would have Darth Sidious as his apprentice, but also another side apprentice that kind of balanced things out. Darth Plagueis eventually tried to cut a deal with Darth Sidious in which they joined forces and kept each other alive using the Force, so that they can rule eternally. And Darth Sidious would stab Plagueis while he was sleeping, but this is the true nature of the dark side. Cooperation can never truly work, and whenever there is cooperation, it's never done with good intentions. Instead, it's done because both sides are seeking something from the other. Being kind, finding compromises with other people, being open-minded, these are not actually weaknesses. They're also not a sign of a good person either. It's just logical behavior, and it takes into account the natural order of things. We are a social creature, and in order to achieve greatness, it always takes more than just one individual to do something. This is why when we say terms like show us your humanity or be more human, we're usually talking about positive traits and not the negative ones associated to the dark side of the Force. The Sith, these dark side Force users, they might reject that concept from an ideological standpoint, but their genetics, their soul yearns for these things. And that is why they seek out others. It is because they are lonely. So there you have it, guys. That is my analysis of the Sith ideology and the true state of a lot of these very sad, lonely Sith Lords. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy.